and he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Isn't that remarkable? God doesn't need you. He certainly doesn't need me. He doesn't need our praise bands. It's not as if God gets to Thursday afternoon and starts saying, "Oh boy, I can hardly wait till Sunday when they crack out those guitars again. Feeling pretty lonely. I need to be stroked up here." He doesn't need our worship. He doesn't need our money. He doesn't need us. He doesn't need anything. In eternity past, before there was anything, God was. And he was entirely full of joy and contentment. And even then, he was a loving God, because in the complexities of God's oneness, in categories we'll see in due course as this series goes on, the Father loved the Son. Oh, we'll come to those categories. There was an otherness right within God himself. He didn't make us because he was lonely and thought, you know, my job as God will be a little more palatable if I make an image bearer or two that strokes me once in a while. He doesn't need us. Now, don't misunderstand. That does not mean he does not respond to us. That he might not delight in us, that he might not be displeased with us. It doesn't mean any of those things. He does respond to us. But he responds not out of some intrinsic need in his own being or character, but out of the entire volition of his perfections and will, he responds. Not because he does not foresee the future, not because he has let things get out of control, not because he has abandoned his sovereignty, not because he is not sovereign, not because he's psychologically damaged, not because he needs something, but out of the perfections of all that he is, with all of his characteristics and attributes, he responds, always in line with all of his attributes all the time. He is never less than God. Can you imagine how hard it was for Paul to get that point across to a bunch of sophisticated academics whose entire notion of religion was bound up with you scratch my back, I scratch your back? And then to make it even steeper, Paul adds another line. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by hands, and he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. We need him. This is also coming out of Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Life and breath and everything else. When the Lord Jesus was alive at the beginning of the first century, he taught that not a sparrow falls from the heavens without God's sanction. The very hairs of your head are numbered. That means, in my case, God's keeping a rapidly subtracting account. And he knows them all. Even the disappearing ones. And every breath I draw is by his sanction. I'm dependent upon him, Paul reminds us, for life and breath and everything else. For food, for health. I am an utterly dependent creature. I'm not the creator. Now, how are you going to have a relationship with a God like that? He's not just some mushy grandfather, and he's not distant. He's as sovereign as the deists want, but he's a lot more personal. And he's got no needs. You've got nothing to barter with. In fact, the only reason you're still alive is because he sanctions it. Last week, one of my friends teaches at a seminary in Dallas. A good man. Teacher of the New Testament, has written major books. Has 3 kids. One is a missionary in Siberia, one's a missionary in Russia, one's a missionary in Afghanistan. He was out jogging. He came home, lay down, and died. Not a blessed thing he could do about it. If your heart keeps beating, it's because God sanctions it. And if he ever says, "You fool, tonight your soul will be required of you," you die. Or if he ever says, "Come home, my child, now's the time, your work is done," you go. How are you going to barter with a God like that? God, I'll give you 10%. He owns you. He owns your life. He owns the whole planet. I mean, what does that mean? Lord, I'll become a missionary. Will that make me a better person? I'll become a deacon at church. No. There's only one way that you're going to have a relationship with this kind of God. And that is if he displays sovereign grace. Because he doesn't owe you anything. You and I are rebels. And we've got nothing to barter with.